Hello listeners, welcome back. Today we have with us Alan Machado, who is the author of at least 3 books which I am aware of, and these books connect or talk about the Mongolian Christian identity in particular. Alan, to start off with, I want you to tell us a bit about this link between the Mongolian and the Goan. Incidentally, when I was 15 years old, I met a Mongolian boy and I told him, Remy, I said, you all are so much like us, you all speak like us, almost language is very close. You all eat the same food, you all culturally are like us, you must be part of us. And he told me, he said, no, we are nothing to do with you. So since that time, I stopped thinking of any connection and till I met you. So tell us a bit.
Hi, Frederick. We are very much, Mongolian Catholic community is very much part of the Goan diaspora. Its roots, its ideology, its complete traditions, its inspiration has been from Goa, which goes back right to the time when they migrated from Goa. And these migrations began around 1570, and the major part of it was in 1680s or so, and then 1740s they were there. A lot of people migrated. The latter migrations were mainly from Bhartes, and they carried with them the culture and the traditions of those times. And some of these come out in the Inquisition edict also, because some of these things have been lost in Goa. Like, for instance, the uh, practice of what we call rose, that day before the wedding. I don't think it is done.
They have to some extent.
To some extent.
Yeah.
But in Mangalore, it is essential. Every
I see.
wedding has this rose. And so the names, the diet, the dietary practices, the language,
Yeah.
of course, the religion, Catholicism binds us together.
Genetics.
They're the same.
Genetics.
Yes, genetics is just being is confirming this link. For instance, I did mine, and I found that
DNA test.
DNA test, and our family tradition says we were from Gaunkars from Aldona. The name, of course, got a link because we are Prabhus, and uh, the Machado link was we were really Macedos before, and that links us immediately with the 12th one god of Aldona. The genetic link links us to a lot of work that was done by Bernard.
Bernard Souza.
Yeah,
Bernard Souza.
the last Prabhu, in which my haplogroup belongs to the same as his.
Before getting into the details, because that can be a bit confusing,
Yes.
let's talk about your last book first, Slaves of Sultans.
Yes.
So, can you give us a gist of it?
Yes, slaves was. It took me about 4 or 5 years to write, but what I try to bring about here is trying to define this identity of a Mangalorean community. Essentially, the Mangalorians had, one experience we had shared in common, Frederick. That is the time of sharing of when before the Portuguese came and when the Portuguese came. But the last defining character which defines our Mangalorean identity was experienced exclusively by Mangaloreans.
That's the captivity.
That is the captivity.
Okay, so when you say captivity, basically you're talking about these years where Tipu Sultan seized quite a few Mangaloreans and kept them in Srirangapatnam.
Yes, not quite a few, all of them.
Thousands of them.
Whoever he could. My estimate goes to about, say, 33 to 40,000.
I see.
Which is about the entire population of. You must understand that about 15 to 20% of the Goan Catholic community at different periods, between that period of 2 centuries, migrated to Canara.
What was the reason for the migration?
My main conclusion is the migrations were caused because of 2 reasons. One was the severe economic problems that Goa was undergoing at that time, including famines, and part of it was the institution of governmental policies which tried to derive maximum revenue from the Gaonkaris. And the other one was the political situation where Goa was undergoing continuous incursions from Maratha armies and different forces over a period from about 1667 when Shivaji came into his first, he tried to punish some of the Desais who were on the borderline between Bangladesh and his territories. And then until 1740, when the province of the north, this Vasin, all these collapsed.
Of course, I don't want to take you away from the main point which you were just raising, and that is of the captivity, you know. So the captivity is something that the Mongolian Christians have gone through, and it's quite traumatic in that sense, and it affects their worldview till today. They feel strongly about it. And I think Praxi Fernandez, who was the chief secretary or acting chief secretary here in the 60s, has written a book called Storm over Srirangapatnam, which I know you don't agree with, but that's okay. Can you tell us something about the captivity and how it affected the Mongolian?
Yeah. First, let me tell you that there were some Goans also who were taken captives. These Goans were expatriates living in Canada. The other thing is, the Mongolian identity had not yet formed at that stage. They were still considered as Goans living in Canada. And this was recognized by treaty between the different governments and uh, Goa as such. Now, there is a very nice record which is maintained of some of the people who were taken captive, because in 1792, about 700 families escaped to Coorg, and there they were given sanctuary and they built a church, and baptisms were recorded, and many of these names are of that period. I'm trying to get somebody involved in digitizing these records. So far, I have not succeeded. So
In Kodagu,
in the Church of St. Anne's, this one.
It's amazing where all our history is scattered and we don't even know. But captivity, like how many people, how many years, how many survived?
Okay. Now the captivity was something which my take is that it was done by Tipu in order to legitimize his position and in creating his new dynasty as such. Some people have said, tried to explain it as, and that's why I don't agree with Praxi, is that he tries to say that the Christians tried to help the British and all. I don't think that is correct at all, because there are no practical, not one instance is recorded or written about. There's no evidence for it at all. So the real issue is that in Tipu's consideration, because we were considered part of the Goan community, so we became hostage. And Tipu had to, in his process of legitimizing his rule, he had to project himself as a supporter of the Islamic cause in order to get his Islamic courtiers to support him strongly. And that is one of the uh, requirements of an Islamic ruler as such, that he has to defend the faith. And so, I don't think Tipu was a bigot at all. I think in his own way, he was just trying to defend and to create an empire. But of course, the hurt never goes.
Numbers are staggering, no?
The numbers, there was a Goan priest called Father Miranda, Joachim Miranda. He was from Talegaon, and he had lived about 28 years in Canada. He was a friend of Hyder Ali, and he mentions a figure of 40,000. I believe that 40,000 is the figure of the number of Catholics in Canada
At that time.
at that time.
All gone.
Of Goan extract.
Extract.
I mean, few would have been of local origins,
Yeah.
but they were really few. And I think out of these 40,000, maybe about 70%, 80% of them were taken. The youngsters were all made in circumcised, those between 10 and 20, more or less, were circumcised and put into Tipu's, trained as Tipu's military slaves, chelas. So many of them lost their lives.
Survivors?
Survivors, I would put it as something like about 15 to 20,000 eventually.
That is how many years later, and when did the
About
captivity?
15 years later.
And they were allowed to come back to Mangalore?
Yes.
And restarted the...
Yes. The first real escapees was the 700 or so families that went to Kodagu. And then there were individual escapes. And the final ones, some went to Malabar, some went to Tellicherry. None could come back to Mangalore because it was under Tipu all those years. And a few, there was a census made in 1801, and that gives some figures. Those figures are there in the book. There are quite a lot of details in the book and references.
So would
as well.
you claim that your book is the most comprehensive history of the Mangalorean Christian till date, or would that be contested?
I think in many aspects it is. And one of the other things is that a lot of citations are made, a lot of references are made, so any future researcher can take it further.
You are an engineer.
Yes.
How come your interest in history? I know you studied in the prestigious Indian Institute of Science. You worked for HMT when it was a big watchmaking company, and subsequently in Australia.
I was in machine tools, not watches.
Okay.
We make watches with machine tools.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, the thing is, I think everybody is really interested, has got interest in themselves, and at a certain stage, you want to know where you came from, what you are, what is your identity, who your people are, to different levels of. You want to know different depths. In my case, it took me from one subject deeper and deeper into other related subjects, because unless you know the entire framework under which it is, you will never be able to really identify yourself. And in today's India, identity is a very, very important issue, because today, everybody is trying to assert their own identities and to incorporate others
To
into
include
that,
others, to push out someone and all that. So
and to incorporate this. So we must know whom we are. Then only we can stand up, and that is why it's necessary to read and to find out.
tell us about your other books, Shades Within Shadows, and one third one which we don't have here, which is out of print, called Saraswati's Children.
Saraswati's Children was written about 20 years back,
Which
and
is also history.
it is history, and it attempted to again define these identities and to get the history, and divided the um, historical period of our community into three phases. One was the pre-Portuguese period in Goa, then the conversions and migrations from Goa, and finally the chapter on Mangalore, which again Tipu and all that came into the picture. At that time, there were not as many sources as there are today, and that is why Slaves is a far more comprehensive book, and it also goes into a lot of the background and defines and demythifies a lot of myths that have originated about the community. In Shades, what I do is try to put a face to these people. Here we are talking of history and of statistics.
Anonymous
Here
people.
Anonymous. Here the faces come out. And
So
this,
it's fiction. It's basically
it's fiction, but based in the time frame when Tipu was laying siege to the fort of Mangalore. He laid siege to the fort of Mangalore from 1783 around May to January, and that gives a very nice time frame in which to place and describe the traditions, the agricultural background of the community, the festivals, uh, and of course, quite a bit of it is what I have learned and what I've heard from my own parents and from others. We have many things in common there, like ghost stories, and then Dukor. Every family used to raise their own pig so that they can.
Tony D'Souza writes about Mangalore. He's half Goan. I mean, sorry, half Mangalorean, half American. And you think he's almost describing Goa in his fiction when he put it out. So
You see, to really understand, you have to have lived part of your life at least there.
true.
Now, in my case, I never grew up in Mangalore. I was born in a small town in Hassan, which is Kannada speaking. I was sent to an English boarding house, English speaking boarding house, not an English one, English speaking. And so my contacts have been from the very early first 4 years. When I was in my mother's lap, I learned Konkani. And of course, when I got married, I got a chance to go back and savor much more of the Mangalorean life. And then I've been coming to Goa practically every year. So
the community is doing well, but there is a lot of rivalry, misunderstandings between Mangaloreans and Goans, particularly in places like Bombay. So what do you suggest? What is the way out? Maybe first understanding our own history.
that is a fight between brothers. But we don't know, some of us don't know we are brothers. So that's it. I think once you know, like for instance, let me say one thing. I did not, the only reason I know that the first thing was that we came from Aldona was a book, handwritten book written by my uncle, saying that we are Gaunkars from Aldona and Prabhus. Since then, I found at least 4 other ancestors who have come from Goa, mine.
I see.
There's the Fernandez family from Diwad Island. There is there's one link to the Britos of Moira, and there is also another, which one was that?
Your wife is also from?
Yeah, my wife, she did not know it, but her cousin is very keen on genetics, I mean on the family ancestry, and he has said that they come from Kandoli.
What's the size of the Mangalorean Christian community today?
I'm not fully aware of that, but I think the numbers of the Catholic community worldwide would be fairly, Mangalorean would be fairly close to Goan figures.
Yeah.
More or less.
I think in Mangalore itself it's about 3 or 4 lakhs.
Yes, easily.
Something like that.
Easily.
Which is very strange. I mean, it's quite large in that sense, and it's not recognized back home as part of the diaspora here, at least.
If the captivity have not occurred, we would have been about maybe 4 times would be larger.
After the captivity, you all came back and you all re-established in Mangalore?
Yes. In my family, it's just one person that I know of, and that is because of a church record which goes to 1800 in the ancestral village of Mermajal, which is about 16 kilometers from Mangalore. There is a small reference to João Machado, Machado actually, and he married a Rosa Braga. Rosa Braga, her ancestor came with the parish priest from Lothli. That would have been around 1740. So he was a 17-year-old boy. So that was the one more link that is there.
And the churches that were there were re-established after the captivity?
Yes. See, there's a big difference between the churches in Goa and Mangalore. Basically, the churches in Goa got a lot of state sponsorship and funds, and you could build grand designs, impressive buildings which stand today. In Mangalore, these churches had to be built by the people who went there.
It's a small minority without state power and without any...
Yes, and no money as well, because you've gone as migrants. All you could give was your labor and your dedki. And with this, they were first mud.
Dedki in the sense?
Dedki, small, a little bit of saving,
I see.
As such, whatever you could. They used to collect, they had a system of collecting, the local parish had a system of collecting contribution from people from, I've forgotten the exact, there's a term for it, but I've forgotten that just now. And the first churches were all mud constructions with the thatch roof, which didn't last very long. Only the bigger ones could have a bit of laterite stone. But all these, most of them were demolished by Tipu. He pulled them down, or they were used for something else. And then when they came back, they were built up again.
Tell us a little about the other writings of the Mangalorean community which you are aware of.
On history, there have been some, for people who wrote at that time, with the information available, some are quite creditable, like Severin Silva's history. He was on Karwar, but he collected quite a bit of information from Madras archives and other places. But one of the conclusions I don't agree again, because he was saying that the community was very powerful and rich and sided with the British. That's to me, it's a figment of imagination. There is a small booklet that was written by a professor. He was actually taught me history in school, ALP D'Souza. It's a very small booklet. There are a few others like that, but many of them sort of tend to depend on each other and sort of repeat each other.
So the mistakes also might, or the misassumptions
and these other things, because there's not much original information, you see, because by the time, by Tipu's time, end of the captivity, that means about 1800, there was very little textual material left. Everything had gone.
Of course, Isidore Coelho's book is a classic, and many Goan housewives, when they get married, maybe if they don't know how to cook, have, including my mom, have learned how to cook from that book.
From Isidore Coelho?
Yeah. And till today it sells like, in dozens, if not 100 copies every month, and it's very reasonably priced by the Daughters of St. Paul. and things like that. No? So that is one of the Mangalorean Goan acknowledged connections.
Yes.
The food is so similar, and of
Yes.
course you have a few unique things and we have some different things, but there is a huge overlap.
Yes, and in fact, if you look at the community, I have not gone into great depth into this, but you can see a difference between the urbanized Mangalorean and the Catholics who live in smaller towns and villages. They're cooking, the differences in the way the same dish is cooked, and the high teas, the koswar, and all that is a bit different.
Last question, what next? Where does your interest in history take you next?
It has led me, and I'm working on a history of India, which I'm trying to cover in maybe 3 to 4 volumes, if I can survive that long. I am close to completing the first volume, which starts. You see, the history of India starts in, or if you want to say, the history of Indians starts in Africa. So I start out of Africa, how we evolved, then from the genetic angle, the archaeological angle, the archaeobotanical angle, the linguistic angle. There's a lot of work done by specialists in this field, and a lot of this material is available online. You need to know where to look, you need to assess which are the credible sources, and that's not too difficult once you start looking at it. There's a lot of nonsense being put as well. So I would, if anybody is interested, I would be very happy to uh, tell people where I have found material and where they can find or even share what I have. Uh, and I end the first volume at Harappa. I'm not going very chronologically, but I'm going with more of episodical things, because there are a lot of things of how the farmers, first farmers came from Iran, and then the Aryans came, the Indo-Aryans came at the end as such. The farmers, the hunter-gatherers, all this I'm trying to put together.
Thanks so much, Alan, and really appreciate taking time off your holiday. We just grabbed you while you were passing through Goa. Thanks for sharing time with us, and hoping to see a lot more of writing from your pen. I know that historians are a little bit possessive about their field, and when others come in, they don't like it too much. But your background in technology, engineering, gives you a different insight, and that's also most useful. Thanks a lot.
It's a pleasure, Rico, and I think the more historians that are there, the genuine integral things, the better it is. More light
True.
is thrown on the field.
True. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.